Welcome to the Streets and People podcast presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. Get Around Cabo Car Free is a volunteer community movement advocating for more transport options for people who can't drive in Caboolture and Morayfield in Queensland. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of these three broad topics. It might be Road Rules 360, where we discuss Queensland's road rules, the legislation, the design for people walking, biking, in wheelchairs or on a scooter. It might be Not Everyone Drives, where we chat with people whose transport options don't include a car in a car-dependent society. And it might be People and Projects, where our conversations are with people working on a specific aspect of inclusive transportation. Today we're doing one of our Not Everyone Drives episodes. My name is Wendy Nash and I'm calling from Gubbi Gubbi country. I am lucky enough to have Travis Bassett with me on the call today. I know Travis because he's been listening to this podcast and he decided that he would offer us some financial contribution, which I love because I do this all out of the goodness out of my heart and I pay for everything. So every financial contribution, no matter how small or big, is always extremely well appreciated. And so I reached out to Travis to say thank you very much. And by the way, would you like to come onto the show? Pretty much. And so perhaps, Travis, you could talk about why you were interested in contributing and what your interest is in riding a bike and which country you're calling from.
I'm calling from Turrbal country in Sherwood, Brisbane. I guess the reason I donated is that it's really good to hear some voices in the local region who are also trying to ride, because there's lots of content coming from Canada in particular, and you can see the changes that are happening in Canada. Probably in my area, I don't think there's as many stories and people that have challenges if I look at my own family. So it's quite interesting to hear all the different stories. I suppose as background, I've always ridden, but it's kind of challenging riding in Brisbane as a kid, even just with car drivers and other things. And then my wife and I actually years ago, we've done a lot of cycle touring. So probably spent about 8 months just riding around Europe all up. But the first trip was probably the most amazing. We spent 4 months, started in Amsterdam and went through Holland and then down through France and across the Pyrenees. Prior to having kids, I used to just ride to work or ride on the weekends. Usually go to the north side to ride. Now that I have kids, I always wanted them to ride to school and everything else because that's what I saw overseas. And I think when I look back, the biggest cultural shock in Holland is the freedom kids have. When I compare that to growing up here, from a young age, they can ride anywhere. You always see online that it's flat or easy there, but then so the whole time I was there, it rained pretty much cycling there, and then they're still out every day riding, and the wind there is something else as well, because I think the day I was most exhausted on that tour was actually in Holland, because you're riding across dikes, it's just ocean on the other side, whereas in the Pyrenees I did have a long day. But yeah, I don't know, just interesting to see the culture that they've created. But I also realized that a lot of that has come through advocacy, and even that 30k street I think you were talking about in the previous episode, that started, from my understanding anyway, a Dutch street sort of closed off to cars because I had too many cars running, and from there it grew into a 30k street. But originally the city, I don't think we're happy with them closing it off. But yeah, it's just interesting to hear the stories. And I think of late, because when I was there as well, everything was in Dutch, so I didn't quite understand their design. Personally, I've just been finding it interesting and kind of frustrating when I'm trying to ride around my kids now, because I bought a cargo bike. Even though I like riding, the expense was something that I sort of held off doing it, but it's been really good with just in terms of me getting some fitness during the day and doing the drop-offs. Now it's getting to the point my 4-year-old wants to ride himself, and he's capable. He rode 7Ks to daycare, but it's really hard with all the intersections, and there's a lot of traffic, so I did that during school holidays. Just trying to figure out how to do it now. Even in our street, just the crossover between roads, people rat run and trying to get into stop, so it's just an interesting challenge. And then I've seen you could do traffic calming and other things to make it a lot easier. Just looking at how they've designed it in Holland's quite interesting, because they seem to have a different way of doing it. They don't seem to focus on speed limits. They say they changed the road condition until they don't really have to do as much police enforcement because they've done a lot of calming. But then for a driver, it's also better because they have distributor roads and roads that are a lot faster, or they cut down their zoning. So if I look at my road, it's always congested with school traffic. I just find it interesting to see that design, but also trying to figure out how to get around for my kids now, especially unless I drive them somewhere. There's not too many places you can just keep rolling without worrying about a car. That's one of the things. So I guess aside from that, the other interest I had was my dad, who's 80 now. He rides 30Ks a day, and he was probably part of the reason I got an electric cargo bike, because he was like, if you get electric, you'll ride a lot more. He's right, actually, it does cut out the hills, and I found it really good to go to the city. As an example, I rode myself to the city on my normal bike, and I was shattered. But the next day I went with the kids and it's quite easy. So it's interesting, the technology of the electric bike, and it's enabled him to ride a lot further. The other thing is he actually has a genetic condition, so he's losing the ability to walk, or he's lost the ability to walk, but he can still ride a bike, so it gives him a lot of freedom. It's just one of those things. So it's good that he can keep it up. Whereas my mum also rode, but she doesn't like riding now because of the traffic and the cars are getting bigger. So really finding that space where you can actually ride, I guess, is a challenge.
Just a few things out of that. The episode that you might find of interest, you may actually have listened to it. It was Phil Latz. He talks about how his wife, I think she used to be a professional cyclist like him. She has some kind of disability or whatever it is, and she now has an e-bike and loves it. And Phil is an absolute advocate. I have an e-bike and I love it. My husband has an ordinary bike and he hardly ever uses it. And I think it's because it's just that little bit harder. And there is this thing, I think sometimes guys think, oh, it's cheating. And I think, well, why is being practical called cheating? There is something about e-bike that's for wusses, something like that. Have you ever had that flack at all?
Oh, no, that's also me when I first got it, because when I toured overseas, pulling a lot of weight, so I thought I'd be fine riding a normal cargo bike, and it's a lot cheaper than buying one with a battery. I was considering just getting a normal one, but I'm glad my dad actually talked me into it, because it's easier. I use it a lot more, and actually now I'm riding my normal bike more. I think with young kids, I just struggle to do much riding, so I ride to the shops with my normal bike, and I've figured out it's only 5 minutes, so quicker than by car anyway, and by the time you park out the front, it's a bit of exercise. In terms of the e-bike, yeah, I'm surprised at how far you can go. So if it was my normal bike, I'd be pretty shattered because I didn't go back to work. But so I go 7Ks one way and then 10Ks the other to drop my kids. The irony is it's actually as fast as people doing the drop off by car, which is more telling about congestion because I have to weave around all the back streets to get there. And I guess that was probably another thing I didn't really know before I got it is I know how to ride to the city, but I don't know how to ride to other places in the local area because you tend to drive on the main road. And then in terms of design, cycle paths are usually put up a massive hill, not the most easiest way. But with the e-bike, it's been really easy. At least I'm not sweating and it's quite easy to go to work. So if I go to the parks and stuff, I can pull my boys' bikes behind me. Yeah, it's been really good. So no, I haven't really had to reflect having e-bikes.
A little hint, if you're on a suburban street and you're finding cars are coming quite close, I was told to put one of those pool noodles sideways across it. It's soft, it's not illegal. I checked it out with John Burrell, who's our road rules expert. Because it's soft, it's not a problem. It doesn't change the legal width of it. Regarding the episode about 30 kilometers an hour, that was the episode with Rod King, and I think he got inspired after being in Germany. And if you want to know about a Buckfitz, which is a cargo bike with a box on the front, then we had one with Johanna. Did you listen to that episode?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to get one with the front loader. Breakfast was just a bit more expensive. And I also thought with traffic, it's a bit easier with a long tail or mid tail that I've got. It's been quite good. I thought
Yeah.
for the kids, it'd be nice to actually have the back fist because then I can see what they're doing, but it's still fun. I compare it to being in the car, especially my 4-year-old's learned how to undo his seatbelt, so it's not great.
We had Kirk on the show. He's one of our volunteers. He just loves going out with his little girls and the general excitement that his little girl has at seeing the world around, seeing the birds, seeing the trees, seeing the different people, this sense of being in the space rather than separate from it on a device, disengaged. Have you found that experience as well?
Yeah, so obviously on the bike, they have a lot more visibility than in the car. And so, especially my youngest, well, they both do. They tend to argue over who saw something first. It's this person walking a dog or it's a train. So I ride near the train line. So yeah, they really do like that bit. It's been good. The hardest bit now is that my kids want to ride themselves. I thought I'd get more years out of the cargo bike. So I probably should have got it when they were younger, but especially the 4-year-old just wants to ride. That's a good thing too.
Yeah, Bicycle Queensland would be a good place to go. And if you want to connect in with other people in your local area, basically what you have to do is what I did. And you just start with a Facebook group and connect in with Bicycle Queensland, see if there's anybody in your area that is in the space. Because you've got kids at school, one of the things that I was told is to connect in with the P&C groups and you can start to get, for instance, bike buses organised that way.
Yeah, or when my kids go to school. When they go to school, it'll be cool. They're in daycare at the moment, or kindy. Yeah, it's just little things actually when you think about the kindy doesn't have any footpaths to it, so it's trying to get the boy to ride there is quite difficult, which I find surprising because it's quite an expensive area. But it's interesting they don't have, it's an old area of the suburb, but it's interesting they don't have footpaths. It's all those little things, I guess.
In the beginning, it is difficult to have a group in that it does feel often that you're screaming into the dark, as Anthony Kimpton has, and we've got his episode coming out this week. Actually, councils are very, very receptive. I have a good relationship with the transport team. And when you become part of a group, you create a group and you represent the community. I have heard from other councils, their transport teams, that they would love to have somebody like me in their area, because it just means that they kind of get the voice of the community in council. It actually counts for quite a lot. How do you get your budget improved? Well, we've got this advocacy group and they want to have it, and da 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 da. So it is worth creating a group. You can just start with a Facebook page. I got one of the big high volume printing houses that you can get one t-shirt, for instance, is really good. And I have these little slips, and it's just a little flyer. It cost me 5 cents a sheet, and I get 1,000 of them done at a time, and I hand them out everywhere, and I just stop and I took people. Now, you may not be as extroverted as I am, but it's certainly very doable. And once you start, particularly once you're connected in with the school groups, it will be helpful. And if you wear a t-shirt, for instance, and everybody gets a t-shirt through this merchandise house, and you turn up to meetings, to council meetings with that same t-shirt, it shows that you're a group. Things like that are really helpful. And it doesn't cost much. I mean, yes, okay, so it's $25 a t-shirt. It costs a little bit of money for those little flyers when you buy 1,000 of them, but it's quite a lot of bang for your buck in terms of your visibility, definitely.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking about that because you started to see more cargo bikes, especially around the place. And I know another family in my street, they ride everywhere and their kids ride everywhere. I haven't actually spoken to them, but yeah, it's like, yeah, it's probably building those connections in the community, really.
And certainly I find that when I'm riding around the area, because I've got my little group, I just go, hi, it's Wendy from Get Around, da da da. And there's a guy who never listens to this podcast. He's not into that sort of stuff. But I see him around and we go, hi, Bill. Not every day, but maybe a couple of times a week. We will bump into each other on one street or another just to say hi. It does definitely give me that sense of connection. He thinks it's great what I'm doing. He would never do this. He doesn't feel like he's got the skills for it or motivation. So there's a lot of interest in somebody else doing it. Often it takes the one person to start, and you just start. And it doesn't matter if you don't know anything. I didn't know anything. So I want to encourage you to do that, because the more people do that, the better it is. And you can reach out to all sorts of advocacy groups. Everybody's trying to get more engagement from the community. There's a lot of support out there. You're not ever alone. Don't ever feel you're alone in that. So just a little bit of a heads up. I've sort of taken over the conversation, but I wanted to let our listener know, and I wanted to let you know that this is a really low, cheap way of doing it on a fairly modest budget, and to encourage people to do that.
It's an interesting idea because I didn't know about the bicycle user group until recently, and they seem quite active in not quite my area, but still pretty close. So yeah, that's true. Finding out about those groups and joining, they seem to pay a lot of attention to what the council is saying, which is interesting.
Facebook has also e-cargo bike and cargo bikes for parents or something like that. You've got a cargo bike, you're interested in the kids, you can go down those avenues. So definitely reach out into the Facebook community groups to see who else might be interested, and just put it out there, and reach out to your own schools and daycare centres, things like that. Definitely. A surprising avenue for you that might be of interest is a lot of people who push prams. I've noticed it more from the mums. They become militant about footpaths when they start pushing a pram. So you can get quite a lot of interest with people who are stuck behind a pram. That's another avenue to raise awareness. One person I know, she said, people become militant about footpaths when you start pushing a pram.
Yeah, sure.
So when you were in the Pyrenees, presumably that's quite mountainous and quite steep and hilly. Was that your experience?
Yeah, obviously it's part of the Tour de France, so we just followed the same route from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. But it was nice. It was actually my wife's idea to go there because we'd been touring around France for a while. But I found you climb for 17 kilometers and then you go downhill for 40 k's. So they're fairly big mountains. I was quite surprised when I got back to Brisbane. I realized Mount Coot-tha wouldn't really count as a mountain in the Pyrenees. So a lot of the mountains that we did training, because we sort of did a route from Toulouse before we got to where we started, were bigger than Mount Coot-tha. It's quite spectacular scenery.
People think that when it's hilly, you can't possibly cycle. And so I wanted to bring that into the picture and say, yes, you can cycle even when it's hilly.
I was going to say, actually, on that point, when we were cycling, there was a 79-year-old German man who was cycling as well, and him and his wife were doing it. I guess they kind of adopted us because they were going up the same mountains, so then they would see us at the next campsite. And then there was a Dutch family I saw that were riding with their kids, and they had a Labrador on the back, so they're still riding up the mountains. So it's interesting to see just different groups. And maybe it's the lifestyle, that 79 is pretty impressive with the mountains he was doing. At the time, it didn't really click, but yeah.
Yeah, and you see said your dad cycled. Whereabouts is he located?
He's not too far from me. It's a couple suburbs over. There's a cycleway along the Western Freeway. That's where he usually just rides to Toowong and back. That was another point about the way we design the city. I was thinking about it. I finished my uni degree before they finished that link to the city. But then when you think about it, it's kind of dominated by, I guess, male architecture in a way, because it's the commuting link is to the city. Whereas I was interested in Holland, they built from schools outwards. And when I was riding there, it's really the last bit was that long distance route that they connected. But it really started from schools, I think. And then from a neighborhood, it went to a district and then out. We kind of have the links to the city, but we don't have as good a links to schools or the finer network that they have. Yeah, it's interesting because we also did different ones. I went to Denmark as well and cycled from Copenhagen to Berlin. Denmark, I just found it nice, but the one thing I noticed was the amount of honesty boxes that they have on their cycle tracks. Never really seen that anywhere else, but you could buy drinks and everything. They'll just put it on the cycleway. But it's kind of cool in Denmark, but different culture again. Their design is different to Holland, but from what I understand, pretty much at 50 Ks, they separate cyclists. Something else you're talking about is one thing in Holland, I never saw anyone riding a road bike except for once or twice on the weekend on the coast, but it's just everyone just riding. And I think the most impressive person I saw was a lady was doing makeup, riding no hands, and she had high heels on as well. It's probably not the safest move, but yeah, I don't think anyone I could do that. So it's kind of cool to see.
I guess if you've been riding a bike since you were 3 or 4, then you're going through your teenage years, and, gals when they're going through their adolescence are experimenting with makeup, and they'd all have these hints and tips about how you can sit on the bike and do your makeup. So they
Yeah.
would be really skilled and proficient at how to hold their bodies on a bike to be able to do things like their makeup and things like that, and that helmet hair as well. So that's very interesting about how Holland started with the schools, whereas we started with commute. The last 3 days there's been a webinar that Austroads has put out, and they've done a research across the whole world, and they've found that 28% of people in the Netherlands ride bikes, whereas even in Denmark it's only 14%, which is almost the same as some of the places around here, which are 10%. So I guess that's some suburbs in Melbourne or maybe in Canberra. What I feel is that we have really focused a lot on guy travel, and there's somebody who's written a book about transport usage and looked at the gender differences in the way that men and women use their trips. I think that by focusing so much on where guys go, this is obviously a stereotype, which is into the city, tend to do the long commutes. I think we've missed out on what happens in the suburbs, and I think that's really a good possibility that we can really expand. How can we get that happening here in our suburbs? I think there's much more opportunity for that by connecting in with the schools much better.
Yeah, I also think everything's actually surprisingly close. I mean, especially with an e-bike. So I look after the kids with me on Wednesdays. Usually I take them by cargo bike everywhere. As you said, it's good for trip training. If I'm driving a car, I tend to avoid too many stops. But with a bike, you can go to the park and then to the library and then the grocery store with them. It's quite easy. I don't have to worry about getting them off in the car park because you get them off right in front of the grocery store. Yeah, it's been quite handy. But those little trips are actually closer than you think. And I suppose it takes a bit of figuring out because I use the pedestrian paths a bit because it's cut throughs under the railway, whereas I don't really want to go through with the cars as much. Or I cut through under the train station, just walk under. But it's kind of that design of it doesn't take as much space to put a cut through for a person, although now you've got the train line there, so it'd be really hard to do. But it's just interesting, the design of the suburb. I've just been looking at stuff like everyone likes living in a cul-de-sac because you can kind of cut off traffic. Whereas when I was looking at something in America, they talk about the cul-de-sac design is good, but they could have put through cut-throughs, and that would have allowed people to walk around their suburb more. I think just watching something that comparing suburbs in America and how far it is to actually walk to the shops. It could take 2 hours because of the way they designed the cul-de-sac, but they designed it, I guess, so you had to drive.
You were really interested in the Streets and People podcast that we have because it's local content. This is the kind of difference. I watch it in the US and I think, oh, that's what it is, because that's what happens in the US, and so much of what we have is the same. But then there are these huge differences where we are a little bit more, I think, like England in some ways than the US. We're not always, but a little bit. And it's those sorts of small differences which may make that difference. Do you have that sense?
Yeah, our cultures are quite similar, especially towards cycling, I guess. It seems America's changing a bit some places. So I guess the content I'm watching is that you've probably been watching Strong Towns as well. So it's
Yeah.
interesting to see some of the cities are changing. So hopefully that flows through. But looking at stuff in Canada, that's why I thought it was amazing that a lot of that that has started from those channels or people talking together that maybe have convinced politicians to change in some areas. And then I was trying to figure out what the difference is in, is it our politics that might make a difference? Because Holland is actually quite right-wing conservative, but there was just an interesting traffic engineer over there was saying that for them, even though they're quite liberal, they see it as freedom. So that's when they're talking to someone who's conservative, it's a freedom movement for all their kids or for older people. And then if they're talking to a social democrat, it's about equity. Anyone in society can ride. And then if they're green, that's kind of easier. It's just climate change, I guess. It's just interesting to see the same political spectrum, but for some reason, maybe it's they've just had more voices. But I also realize they've probably fought pretty hard to make changes. So it's interesting to see the differences in culture. But there is a thing I was thinking when I was riding in France. I don't think a lot of people rode, but the drivers there are much nicer. I don't know if it's because of the Tour de France, but the first time someone yelled at me, I thought it's like before. But then I realized that they're actually yelling out encouragement when you're going up a mountain, or when they're beeping at you, it's because they're fine with you riding. It's nothing to do with them. They're just encouraging you. It was just interesting experience being in France to riding here.
It seems to vary according to the perception of the person as to whether somebody thinks that people in France are aggressive. People say often the French people riding bikes, just the ordinary people, were very aggressive, in Amsterdam. And I've heard that. And I go to those places and I don't find it at all like that. So it's something that seems to be very variable according to the person's perception rather
Yeah,
than
sure.
any particular one reality. Although I would say that I do know that a lot of people don't like to drive cars anymore because they are afraid here, that is, seniors, people like that.
Their road network in France, maybe I didn't go into cities that much. They've got A, B, C, and D roads. It's just nice. I don't know, they must have lower speed limits or something. So I remembered riding there was I actually found it a lot easier than Holland to navigate because you have all the Michelin maps. And it's a long time ago, but it's just a nice experience. I did live in England for a little bit, and England seems very similar to us in a way, but I didn't do as much riding. I rode around London on Christmas Day, which was amazing because there's no traffic. So it's cool to see. And some of the parks in London were nice to ride to. It's probably similar to Australia in a way.
They've got quite a lot of changes coming because obviously Wales has dropped down to 30 kilometres an hour, and London is also in the process of doing a lot of change. And I think England as well, generally, so outside London, is going to have a lot of changes. Ireland, I know, is having massive changes with really increasing their bus service systems. And
Okay.
I think when you have good public transport, you can really increase your active transport, riding bikes and so forth.
I'd say these days I mostly ride to the train station, which is 3 k's away, rather than to the city. Just with kids, it's faster to. But I could drive. I used to drive, but I actually find just riding there is quite a good thing. I was asking my wife why she doesn't, but it's the same thing with cars and traffic. It's not far to go, but
Yeah, it's much more stressful, I find. So we're sort of coming up to the end of time. I've really enjoyed the chat. It's been very nice to hear just a little bit about your perspective. Some of the people who listen to these episodes are actually policy advisors. If you were to imagine that our listener is a policy advisor, what would you like to see? What changes would you like made? What would be important for you in terms of your suburb, with the kids, with your wife, getting more people walking, riding bikes, on buses, on trains? What would you like to see and suggest?
I think the main thing is how you connect to school and how you connect to daycares. Some of that is actually zoning because all the daycares are built on the main road now, whereas the old ones are further back, which obviously adds, there's so much congestion on the road that doesn't have to be there. So it's kind of funny that I can ride and still be faster than a car, and then you see everyone's dropping off at school because really the road should be quite quick, but it's just making those safe ways to ride and somehow make it less stressful because every intersection is a point of conflict for a little kid, I feel. Where I am, the Greenway, somehow if you could connect it to the school, you could reduce congestion by a long way. That actually makes it better for everyone. If you have to drive, in terms of public transport, I was really lucky because we've got a train line, which is brilliant. Getting around by walking or drive, it's a bit tougher.
In Paris at the moment, what they've done is they've got something called school streets. And it's very funny because, normally the French, they do love to protest about many things. But it turns out it's remarkably easy. They just walk out on the street and they put some fences up and they say, right, this is a school street. That's it. That's the only consultation they have with the surrounding areas. They speak to a couple of the business people, but usually within 14 seconds of that happening, the business people are delighted because the mums and the dads and the kids are all in the street hanging out there for maybe an hour after school. And
Yeah.
business is booming. So they love that. But here, if you were to do that, the entire world would blow up without a doubt.
Yeah, we've got one road that's a 4-lane road. How do you cross these roads? I've been crossing with my 4 and 2-year-old, and I like riding, so I'll do it. But you can see if you don't, like our dad, when I went to daycare, all the kids wanted to ride a cargo bike, but when dad, he said it's too dangerous. I'm like, it's a bit sad that it is that way, but I see his point of view. It's trying to get across the road with a 4-year-old is fun, but I'm getting there.
Maybe outside kindergartens and daycares, what could be useful actually is to do what they call road narrowing. And instead of crossing 4 lanes, you're actually just crossing 2, one on either side. So for that little bit that's in front of the schools, you narrow it there, which causes a whole lot of congestion and people will blow up. But there is a way of doing it so that people don't necessarily have to do that, but it does encourage those who need to use that space to use that space, and people who are using it who could use an alternative route, they could do something else. The spaces that you're thinking about, does that sound like that might be something that would really benefit?
So I've watched a bit too much of like a Dutch traffic engineer. I find it just interesting that we need the 4 lanes. They say 4 lanes creates lane switching, which increases the speed and more chance of an accident. In terms of the flow, I don't think it would increase congestion, because if you could drop it to 2, one could just be an access lane at a lower speed. You could have the other road flow a lot better, even if it's at a slower pace. And they seem to work a lot on intersections. I was just curious. I'm sure that maybe I'm looking at that road a lot going, it could actually be a whole lot better than it is now. Part of that would be narrowing, and part of it's how you manage intersections and how you manage all the mergers, because we tend to build right on the main road. There's all the daycares going there, and you've got 300 cars going in and out now, which is just going to slow traffic anyway, and all the houses have to merge into that. Some of it's old. We've got the shops there as well. Just thinking it could be a whole lot better design. We seem to think you need to go faster to get places, but really it's kind of crawling anyway. And I see people riding on it. I'm not willing to ride on that road, but the traffic's going slow enough that someone on a road bike can ride on that road, but I'd rather not. You have this idea that speed equals flow, but I don't know. You're right. Narrowing it would make it a lot easier to cross for sure with little kids. And yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if it's probably cost too much money, but we're very good at building tunnels and overpasses. Just having a pedestrian way across you wouldn't have to interrupt the flow at all.
Yeah, I mean, they're very expensive. You have to get land and approval and money and grants and all that sort of stuff. And
Yeah, that's true.
it's still not making it safe for kids. Maybe that's not the right way, because it actually takes up space. You'd probably have to close one of those lanes anyway, so you may as well just do the road narrowing. Is that street a council street? Is it a collector road, or would it be an arterial road? Because that's TMR, that's state.
It's council.
Is your council Brisbane?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
I would see if you can get parents from daycare and see what can be done about that, because most of those trips will be within 1, 2, 3 kilometres of home, particularly daycare centres.
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting though. I raise things at daycare anyway, but it's interesting that out of it, there's only about 3 of us that take their kids by bike or walk to daycare, but it's 80 cars that turn up every morning. But the other thing I was thinking, it's actually nice for the teachers if I can get my son to ride, because I know as a teacher said she spent a lot of energy trying deep muscle therapy or something, just trying to get him to do weights or calm down. There is an impact for the teachers as well, depending on how the kids get to school. So that's why, in part, trying to get him to ride means that he can settle down better for daycare. It's good for both of us, so I can leave easier.
There's lots of research, and it says that when kids ride bikes to school, their marks go up. Their relationships with their peers go up, their relationships with the teachers go up, and their relationship with their parents go up. Basically, the kids are just getting a bit of an opportunity to let off some steam and do things that kids are supposed to do, run around. That just leads to a whole lot of benefits for their well-being from an early age.
I can see it. Yeah, it's a good thing.
Anything else you would like to add? Wish list, question, idea, thoughts, anything at all?
The one thing I've always been wondering about is I was considering buying an EV before I got the cargo bike. That's when I was surprised when you look at Ireland and England and even the US that they've got subsidies on electric bikes. I like riding, but that cost of the bike, initially, I wasn't sure if I'd get it or not. I use it every day, so it's brilliant. I wrote to my own minister. I was saying it's strange that we put so much subsidy into a car, but the actual bike could replace so many short trips, and we haven't replaced our other car. That's my only thought, which is funny.
In the advocacy world, there's a lot of chagrin about that. How come you're subsidizing cars? And it turns out those big SUVs, I don't know if you saw that, a report came out this week, and they are subsidized
Okay.
compared with e-bikes, which have no subsidy, and they attract GST and all sorts of other things. The finances are really stacked against that.
Because it really does actually replace a car for short trips. I've still got 2, but I was thinking of getting rid of one. For the short trips around the suburb, it's more comparing it to a car, especially with an electric battery and with the kids on the back. It would be good. It's another decision point because they can be quite expensive because they're an electric cargo bike, I mean. And basically the subsidy on EV would pay for an electric cargo bike.
And it sounds like what you're saying is that you could actually drop the second car because of your e-bike.
Yeah, we don't really use the second one that much at all.
And this is exactly what they find across the board. So many households would be $12,000 better off by buying an e-bike.
Yeah, true.
That's a year. Yeah. So any final words before we leave it?
No, I think I've covered it. Thanks for your time.
It's been great. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope our listener appreciates you taking the time out and appreciates the podcast too. Thanks so much, Travis, for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day and your financial contribution. It makes a huge difference because normally I feel like I'm screaming into the void with pretty much everything I do. So to have some feedback and some contribution just makes me think, oh, somebody's listening somewhere. So that makes a huge difference, definitely.
Thanks for making the podcast. It's really interesting to hear from different people. Quite good in that respect.
All right, that's great. Thanks very much.
All right, catch you later.
Thanks for enjoying Streets and People presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. We publish our podcast regularly at the usual places and on our website where you can find out more about us. getaroundcabocarfree.com.au. That's www.getaround, get around, that's pretty straightforward. Cabo, C-A-B-O, that's short for Caboolture. Car Free, C-A-R-F-R-E-E. There's no hyphen in that. .com.au. Our theme music is The Thief on AM Sound, which is just like our cars on our streets, always stealing the space. So let's stop that thief.